It's weird because I never thought I would be a writer. I wanted to do theatre, and for a long time I thought I wanted to be a director, and then I thought I wanted to be an actor. And writing, I didn't start writing until later in life. I was in my 20s. And it was after I'd done a master's at Edinburgh University. It was Scotland that told me you should be writing.
Hello and welcome to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. My name's Anne Morgan. I'm a writer and Royal Literary Fund Fellow. And today I'm really pleased to welcome to the studio Sara Shaarawi, a Glasgow-based playwright who was born in Cairo. Now, Sara has worked with many theatre companies across the UK. Her credits include Niqabi Ninja, Sister Radio, The Day the Stampers United, and PAL, your AI care companion, which sounds intriguing. She also runs workshops, and these have included a Muslim women's writing workshop for 3 years at Glasgow Women's Library. That was with Stella Quines, okay. And she was an associate playwright with the Playwright Studio Scotland. Now, she got involved with the Royal Literary Fund in a slightly unusual way. Most of the Royal Literary Fund fellows come through the route of being fellows at universities around the UK, and you can apply if you're a writer who has published at least 2 books. You can apply and you can work with students on their academic writing at universities. But you got involved with RLFs by a different route, didn't you, through Writers' Mosaic, Sara? Can you explain a little bit about that and what your work with Royal Literary Fund has been?
Yeah, so Writers' Mosaic is a sort of collective of writers, writers of colour particularly. And I got invited specifically to be part of Writers' Mosaic in order to apply for the Reading Round Fellow. And I was really interested, and so connected to Writers' Mosaic, and through that applied to be a Reading Round Fellow.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're going to talk about that. Yeah. But to start off with, it's April. April has many days attached to it. There seem to be sort of national days or international days for something almost every day these days. And apparently in April, there's National Hug a Newsman Day, International Pillow Fight Day, Walk Around Things Day, World Rat Day, and Plan Your Epitaph Day, intriguingly. But there is also a day that is particularly close to both our hearts, I think, World Book Day, which is on the 23rd of April. Now, weirdly enough, in the UK and Ireland, we don't celebrate World Book Day with the rest of the world in April. We actually have a World Book Day in March for schools, and that always makes me a bit sad. I mean, I think it's great that we're encouraging kids to read, and that's fantastic. But because World Book Day is so school-focused, it tends to sort of only be about kids, I think, in the UK and Ireland, and it feels out of step with the rest of the world. I get it, because usually World Book Day that the rest of the world celebrates falls in school holidays, so schools can't take part if we were to do it then. But I don't know, it feels like a missed opportunity to me. And I know, Sara, that a lot of your work involves translation, international work, that you bring together stories from many backgrounds in your writing and in your practice. Why is reading internationally so important to you?
The simple answer is I'm curious about the world, and I don't really understand the urge to be insular that I come up against in the UK quite a lot. I do love to know more about my own culture and my own history, but I'm so curious about the world. I find that engaging with different parts of the world is a really enriching experience. You get to know who you are a bit better as an individual, but also as a community, as a society, as a human being. And then also, you get to understand the world a little bit better. It is about connection, and it's about coming together and knowing one another. I think growing up in Egypt, I felt very constricted. I grew up in Egypt in the early noughties. I remember the world before the internet, and then it sort of developed as I was growing up as a teenager. Before that, Egypt felt very isolated. I didn't really have access to a lot of world literature, but also just films. Films were censored as well. Traveling was not easy. I was very dependent on my family, and it really depended on whether my family allowed me or not. And And that always felt very constricting. So I've always had a fascination of like, okay, that's all well and good what's going on here, but I want to know what's going on there as well.
That's really interesting, because I think I'm a bit older than you, but I think we had a shared experience in that the internet came to the UK in the mid-90s. I think kind of by 96, 97, most middle-class homes certainly had internet access. So I remember as a teenager, I was about 14, 15 when we got dial-up internet in our house. Yeah. So like you, I remember a pre-internet world, and I remember seeing the internet come and seeing what that did to change. You had that experience maybe 10 years later.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting, because obviously the internet came to Egypt a bit later.
I mean, it was probably there in the 90s, but we didn't have access to, or it wasn't sort of widespread access. I guess, what I mean is, I was in primary school when I got internet, but it was like Netscape. It wasn't the sort of later stuff. It was the one where the page takes like 10 minutes to load.
Yeah, and you see the pictures gradually.
Yeah, exactly, and all. And I remember specifically like having access to pictures of theatre productions, just putting in searches for things. And it was a very primitive search at the time. It's not, even then, like it's not like now. You had to go through pages and pages to actually find what you were looking for, and it wouldn't be a very good result because the internet just didn't have that much on it yet. But that was thrilling. I've always had this urge of just like, I want to know more. I'm very comfortable being a student, actually. I like that feeling of, oh my God, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Possibly the fact that I'm mixed also affects that. My mother's Italian and my father's Egyptian. I grew up in Egypt. But for example, the family language has always been English. So I always say English has always been my first language, because my parents don't speak each other's languages. So we always spoke English in the home. And I would say my first language is English as a second language, because it's not, I didn't learn English from sort of native English speakers necessarily. They had to learn it as a second language.
Which must give you an incredible access to the language, an incredible perspective on it, really, because your ear is attuned somewhat differently. And so you must notice different things about how the language works to the way that I would think about the language, perhaps, or you inhabit it differently.
In some ways, I think I'm really bad at languages. I've tried to learn languages from scratch and I just can't, even though I speak 3 of them fluently. But I'm always really fascinated. I use language wrong. I use wrong tenses. My English is wrong, my Arabic is wrong, and my Italian is wrong, which is really hard as a writer because everyone's always looking for that authentic voice. But the reality is a lot of people speak like me. A lot of people are in between cultures, in between spaces of belonging, don't quite fit, and all of that.
You see, a lot of people listening to you speaking would be thinking, there's nothing wrong with your English. Your English is perfect. You say you use tenses wrong sometimes, or can you give an example of something that you might consider to be wrong, or someone might consider to be wrong in the way you use language?
I've got quite a few of those. So for example, if I'm sitting next to someone or lying next to someone and I need a bit more space, I'll be like, go in a bit. And go in a bit is an Arabic transliteration, because we say khush shwaya, which means like go in a bit. And in the beginning in the UK, people were like, what does that mean? Or I say after tomorrow, which again, Italian and Arabic use that. And you have to say the day after tomorrow, because like in English, everyone's like, all the days are after tomorrow. And I'm always meaning the day after tomorrow. And when I was in school, my mom called me. I was at a friend's house and she was like, when are you coming home? And I was like, I'm coming down in 5 minutes. And coming down, again, it's an Egyptian transliteration, means I'm leaving the house or I'm leaving in 5 minutes. But she was just completely confused. She's like, coming down from where? Where are you? Aren't you at the end? It's just, my life has a lot of these, I use words wrong. It really shows in my writing. And in the beginning, it was really hard because British actors would struggle with the language because it didn't make sense to them and they couldn't embody it It didn't make sense to their brains. And in the beginning, I'd change it all and try to make it more British, more easier for actors in Scotland and in the UK to say. And then I had this realization later on that actually, no, that's how I speak and that's how my character speaks, because she's Egyptian. She's Egyptian and this is set in Egypt, but it's written in English. So this idea of it needs to be an authentic English doesn't make any sense, because she wouldn't be speaking English. So, or she'd be realistically, a lot of middle-class Egyptians will speak a mixture of either French and Arabic or English and Arabic, depending on what school you go to. So that's what she would actually be speaking. But this idea of authenticity, I think, is really, it tickles me. And I'm always like, no, actually, I think the way we speak tells the story of who we are. And I think that's really important to maintain that, to maintain your curiosity about that.
Now, we mentioned Reading Round, and I know that you've brought some translated literature into that. Can you tell us what Reading Round is? For people who don't know, what is a Reading Round Fellow's remit? What do you do?
Yeah, so Reading Round is sort of one of the many educational programs run by the Royal Literary Fund. It's a reading group run by a professional writer, and you meet once a week with the same group of people. People have to sign up to it. It's completely free. I guess it's a bit like a book club, except no one needs to buy or read anything in advance. So everyone shows up once a week, and I choose 2 pieces of short form writing, usually a poem and a short story. And within an hour and a half, I read both pieces, and there are discussions of both pieces afterwards.
And what sort of pieces have you featured? What have your picks been?
Because I get quite frustrated in the UK. I've lived here quite a while now. I've also studied here, and I get very frustrated about how insular it can get in terms of like what the canon, access to the canon, what is programmed, what is published. I guess work from other parts of the world are seen as sort of niche or sort of like specific. It's not as embedded within the culture here as in other parts of continental Europe, for example, which have more of a connection to other parts of the world. And so I was really keen for the group, but also for myself to set the challenge to really try to get a broad scope of global literature, not just contemporary literature, but from different writers, different eras. We had a beautiful session where I brought in a poem by Fatima Asghar, American Pakistani poet, and an older short story by Sadat Hassan Manto called Toba Tek Singh, about partition, written at the time of partition, which brought on, both pieces were about partition, but at very different times, written in very different times. And we only had 2 members of the group who were of South Asian heritage, and they sort of led the session at that point, and it was really beautiful. And everyone had lots of questions, and it became sort of this big, rich discussion about what happened there.
Fantastic.
It's really nice.
So on this podcast, we have the good fortune of having access to the amazing Royal Literary Fund archive, which has recordings of hundreds of writers of all kinds, all backgrounds, all disciplines, who talk about the creative process, the writing life. And so today we're going to dive into the archive. And to start us off, we've got playwright and scriptwriter Nicola Baldwin's letter to her younger self.
It's June, 1979. You're on the last bus home. You don't live far from the centre of Huddersfield, maybe 5 stops. The bus is playing music, interrupted by a police appeal. That voice is everywhere. I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. Soon it will be your stop, the park gates. Already, your heart is pounding. You'll cross the road towards the ambulance station, shortcut through the chapel car park, and run like hell. They never learn, do they, George? You've warned them, but they never listen. At the rate I'm going, I should be in the book of records. I think it's 11 up to now. You look down, and there's a letter poking out of the seat in front. Is it a clue? Back then, everything was a potential clue. But it's addressed to you. Dear Nicola, the tape is a hoax. The Yorkshire Ripper is Peter Sutcliffe. The police have interviewed him 9 times. Show him this note if you like, it won't make a difference. Sutcliffe will be caught in 2 years by chance. You will be on the Euston Road in London when you see his picture in the papers. The man who, throughout your teenage years, murdered 13 girls and young women and attacked 11 more within 30 miles of where you grew up. You'll be heading into university after a night out. See, Nicola, despite what everyone keeps telling you, the life you want doesn't mean turning your back on the girl you are now. It's not a choice between opposites, but the attempt to bring them together. You're running towards a future where daydreaming, recklessness, and imagination will serve you well. You're at the park. Time to get off. The tape is ending. I'll keep on going for quite a while. I can't see myself being nicked just yet. Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper. You crumple the letter. You don't need it. The words are in your head because the words are yours. Already, you're starting to understand words are the way out of your fear and confusion. Be strong. This is your street. 200 paces to your house. Your parents love you, though you make it hard for them at times. It's not their fault their life is so different from the life you want. You'll have your chance. Not everyone is so lucky. Keep going, keep dreaming. You're almost home. Looking back, I wasn't as frightened as I should have been, but I was lucky and determined. The Ripper's last victim, Teresa Sykes, aged 16, survived a hammer attack on her way home, 2 miles from my house, by screaming. Helen Ricker, 18, killed by Sutcliffe a mile away, was not so lucky.
So there we are. That was Nicola Baldwin writing a letter to her younger self. I'm wondering, Sara, did anything stand out for you about that or resonate with you in any particular way about your own experience as a young girl growing into a writer?
It's weird because I never thought I would be a writer. I wanted to do theatre, and for a long time I thought I wanted to be a director, and then I thought I wanted to be an actor. And writing, I didn't start writing until later in life. I was in my 20s. And it was after I'd done a master's at Edinburgh University. It was Scotland that told me you should be writing. And I think that's why I went back and decided to become a playwright in Scotland.
I'm intrigued by that. Scotland told you should be a writer. How did Scotland tell you that?
It was Scottish playwrights. So David Gregg, Nicola McCartney, Julia Todevin, a sort of series of playwrights were looking at me being like, you should be writing. Or whenever I write a little something and showed it to them, they were like, this is amazing, and really, really nurtured me when I first started out in a way that I couldn't imagine that that's what I would end up doing. It's the only part of theatre I didn't study, which I think was actually good in the sense of I loved studying theatre, but I feel I'm an overthinker, and I think not overthinking is how you sort of connect to that intuitive part of you that wants to tell stories and wants to share and wants to do that experience. So I think it was good. There weren't rules when I first started. It was chaotic, but I think it served well in the beginning.
Something that came through quite strongly to me in Nicola's letter was this sense of being true to yourself and identity. And she says at one point, despite what everyone keeps telling you, the life you want doesn't mean turning your back on the girl you are now.
Yeah.
I wondered about that in relation to your work, because so much of your work centres around identity and particularly voices that may traditionally be somewhat pushed to the side or marginalised or not given the respect or the kind of centre stage that they deserve. You give those stages to those voices. Can you talk to me a bit about that, about that sense of identity and being true to who you are?
That line did stand out to me as well. And it is really hard because when you're young, you do feel like you don't know who you are, or you're sort of like a bit manic. You feel very strongly about who you are and very confused about it. I think that's definitely always part of the journey. A lot of my work, because I write for theatre and I write scripts, I don't really write traditional like novels and poetry and things. So where a play started and where a play kind of ends, as in production, there was always several years in between. And when you're a migrant writer or a writer of migrant heritage, a playwright of migrant heritage, you do get put in those boxes, you do get marginalized, you do have these sort of, you need to tell certain types of stories that we want to program. And so, and the other thing that happened for a long time was you end up in what I call a sort of development hellhole, where you're just, theatres are constantly giving you development opportunities, but there's nothing that comes from it. There's nothing sustainable. It just sort of evaporates. My early work, I was in that sort of development hellhole, and by the time they went to production, I was in my late 20s. I was much sort of older, maybe wiser, I don't know, but I had much more confidence and experience. But I was also just in a different political and artistic space. If I were to write that play now, that's not how I would write it. But I did have this sense, Niqabi Ninja is one of them, where I just did have this sense of I need to stay true to the 20-year-old that began this piece. That's who wrote this. And even though now I'm almost 30, and I would write it in a different way. I would write it from a perspective, because the early work was more from a perspective of newly arrived from Egypt and was very rooted in Egypt. And were I to write it again, I would write it with everything that I know about the UK, because I'd constantly be thinking this is a UK audience and what's that relationship. And I just felt like that would erase her. And that is another form of that marginalization. So that was really hard, of like, how do I stay true to that voice and that pain? And that particular play was about rage, while also bringing in some of what I've learned, but making sure that I don't overpower her or erase her from the play.
So that's a lovely thing, because we've had this piece from Nicola about writing to her younger self, and what you were doing with that play was letting your younger self write to you and not disrupt that voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a really lovely thing.
I've never thought of it that way, but absolutely,
And I've seen it. I saw a video of I think it was a student production of Niqabi Ninja.
Okay.
Two really powerful actresses performing it, and it felt quite radical in a way, because the sort of performances, they were really strong, powerful performances. Two women in hijabs speaking in a way and commanding the stage in a way that we're not used to seeing women like that being given the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
And I found that really powerful. I thought it was a really striking thing. It's sometimes only when you see voices like that being elevated that you realise what's been missing.
Yeah.
And that's what you do in your work, I think. You bring those things forward.
Thank you.
So that brings us nicely to our craft slot. And you mentioned there about your experience as a writer of migrant heritage, feeling sometimes that you're being put into a box or required to do certain kinds of work. And I wondered about audience, about what role that plays in your writing, how much you think about audience, or how you deal with that question of audience. Because obviously in the UK, as in any country, there are kind of different agendas going on. Yeah. There are different pots of money that are available for certain kinds of work. Certain people are gatekeepers and have control over the sort of work that goes on. And audience, the idea of who the implied audience is sometimes a part of that.
Yeah.
What role does that play for you? Do you find audience can be an empowering idea, or is it something you need not to think too much about until a certain stage?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of it immediately, because usually the first stages, I'm just trying to find the characters. I start from character. I love writing characters to the detriment of plot a lot of the time. I try to find the story. I try to find my characters first. But when it comes to actually like developing it for the stage, for where I go, okay, what's the relationship to the audience? The audience is absolutely crucial. This question around audience is something you get asked a lot. If you're a writer of color, if you're a migrant writer. I like to refer to myself as a migrant writer, particularly because I feel like that's my identity right now. It took a long time to accept, but yeah, that's who I am. The question of audience you get asked, who's the audience? Who's the audience? Who's the audience? Who are you talking to? It took years, but out of the frustration of this question, because I kind of never knew how to answer it. I never knew what they wanted me to say. Sometimes I'd be like, oh, this has to be for the Arab community. This has to be for this. But I think now I'm very confident I have a very particular view of who my audience is, and that is anyone who wants to come to the theatre. I'm very grounded now within North African and Arab culture, hospitality is huge. It's a big part, and even Italian culture, it's a big part of who we are. And I always go back to that. I'm like, my audience are my guests. Like, I always think of like the theatre, we are the hosts. This is our space, this is our house. So my audience are my guests. So I try to create plays where no one feels excluded. No one feels like they need to have read about the history of a certain place to understand it. I don't like talking down to people. That doesn't mean I like whitewash my plays. I really love it when certain jokes only certain laughs across. There's the big laughter of everyone gets the joke, and then there's the little jokes that only women will get, or only Egyptians will get, or only Arabs will get. And it's just sort of having this scattered emotional reactions. I think it's thrilling. I love it because like you can see that the audience, you bring an audience together, they laugh or cry or whatever together. And then when it's like specific people, you can see the people next to them just kind of like noticing that and going, well, what was that about? I've got a question about that. And I think that is one of the pleasures I have about theatre and about creating theatre, that it's for everyone. And when I write jokes and when I write things like that, I would like to say, oh, I know exactly who's going to laugh at this, but the reality is I don't, and it's always surprising to me. I wrote a piece once about, I had a scene with the hymen breaking, and again, it was this beautiful thing where sort of older British women and sort of younger Muslim women or women from conservative societies were the ones that really understood that scene in ways that other people didn't. So I'm really against being insular. I like being open. I'm like, what if a person who's never been to the theatre came to the play? What would I want them to experience? Okay, what if a person that has a theatre academic came to the play? What would how do I bring those two experiences together, for example? I'm happy to say the times my plays have seen a stage, it's always been a very mixed audience, not a specific community. It's always been very, very mixed. And I hope it continues to be very, very mixed. Yeah.
Fantastic. So it's now time for another dip into the archive, and we have poet, playwright and novelist Gabriel Badamosi on a formative experience performing in Romeo and Juliet.
My example of life-changing literature comes from the fact that I played Capulet, Juliet's dad, when I was 16, in a youth theatre production of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet at the Old Vic Theatre in London. Really, I wanted to be Romeo. We all did. Only the nurse among the girls wanted to be in the play about a nurse sorting things out, instead of the one about Juliet falling in love. They all wanted the attention of being the ones to be loved. We didn't like Romeo, who played it flaunting himself. So we liked it when the first night came, and all our jealous dreams about him came true. It happened like this. The Inner London Education Authority, who organised for us to put on the set text for schools, had one of those days, like the one in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, when you flip a coin and it keeps coming up heads. They only booked in girls' schools. So on the opening night, we had an audience of 1,000 teenage girls screaming their heads off in derision at Romeo, trying to get past the line, "Oh, sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate." Well, he was a bit limp, but we didn't mean for them to tear him apart. He was like a mouse, panting in the spotlight, under an enormous black cat stretching its claws out from the darkness. Of course, they were only sharing that they all knew about the first-time nerves ending in impotence. It was part of the sex education that we all got out of the play at school. But contempt for performance not coming up to scratch can be cruel. It started with giggles. 1,000 girls, it's infectious. And became the roaring sound of a mob starting to enjoy it, ready to pounce and kill anything that moved across the stage if it even opened its mouth. No one wanted to go on. Not the Capulets, not the Montagues, none of the boys, not one of the girls. And seeing it from the audience's point of view, it must look very funny when instead of making an entrance, the actors get pushed onto the stage, struggling in their costumes. Everyone was getting killed out there. It was blood all over the stage. Until I came on as Juliet's dad and grabbed her by the hair and ripped her dress open and threw her across the room for disobeying me and meeting a boy. I even remembered to glare at Juliet's mum, daring her to say anything. Well, she didn't have a line there, so she just looked away. You could hear a pin drop, the silence of Juliet sobbing, and that's when the penny dropped. The dirty secret was out about who I was and what was going on for all those girls. I was my dad, jealously guarding the burgeoning sexuality of my teenage sisters against those lurking boys. And they, out there in the dark, were all my daughters. Because what was going on in my house was going on in theirs. The dirty secret of sexual jealousy and violence between fathers and daughters. It was out, made public by the silence that surrounded it, the pin drop, the sobs. Now, when I write, the experience of becoming my father to play Capulet informs the way I make characters. And the public silence of 1,000 London teenage girls has always sounded more thunderingly truthful to me than applause.
Gabriel Badamosi there. What did you make of that, Sara?
I mean, yeah, there's so much to unpick from that. Really, I mean, when the way he talks about the thundering silence or the silence and how truthful that was and how more meaningful that was than applause. I totally get that. But it's also the way he talks about informing his characters. It's about stark honesty. It's about like people, that stark honesty where people recognize, people will recognize in those characters their own life, maybe without necessarily consciously doing so. I love the painting of the theatre and how powerful that can be. It's a really riveting experience, and how it can flip from people being completely disengaged into totally engaged, and learning from that.
You mentioned earlier that you had done various roles in theatre before you found your way to writing. Did you find any of those experiences have informed your writing in the way that Gabriel describes?
Yeah. I did. So my first job in Scotland was when I was a student. There's a sort of lunchtime theatre, pub theatre called Play a Pie and a Pint, where you watch a play, eat a pie, have a pint. And at the time, they used to do, and I wish they still did, this ended a while ago, but they used to do a season of sort of plays in translation. So the National Theatre of Scotland used to commission the translation process. So there would be bridge translations, and then they'd get sort of established Scottish playwrights to do the adaptation. And then they would go on in this very lo-fi, a bit ramshackle but beautiful sort of lunchtime theatre experience. And at the time, so this was 2012, it was like right in the heart of the Arab Spring. So they had an Arab season of plays. And I reached out saying, I'm a student, I'm studying theatre in Edinburgh, I'm from Egypt, I speak Arabic, I can read and write. And they were like, can you translate for us? And I was like, at the time, I was like, 21, 22. And I had heard about all these people saying, if you can't do the thing, just like blag it, just say you can and get the job and then figure it out. And that's exactly what I did, because I said, yeah, I can translate. But the thing is, the Arab world, we have a lot of different Arabics. And it was a challenge. I could, they sent me a couple of letters and a bunch of tiny plays, like 2-minute plays. Well, they were supposed to be 2-minute plays in Arabic, but obviously you tell a playwright 2-minute play, and then everyone sent in like 20-minute plays that were going to be sort of tied in together to make a 1-hour show. And I managed with the sort of standard Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, Palestinian Arabic, but then, I had a Tunisian play and I was like, I don't know how to do this. But with the help of friends, I managed. But that piece with the plays sort of being tied in together, and when I met with David Gregg, who was the curator and sort of the director of this piece, he was like, do you act? And I was, at the time, I was like, yeah, I want to do a bit of acting. And that was a really formative experience. I'd never had an experience like that. It was because everyone sent in such long pieces. We had to sort of chop it all up and put it back together again with devised scenes. A lot of it was lots of audience interaction, lots of switching between Arabic and English. It really required being in your body and not thinking too much about it, not acting. This is where I realized acting, for me at least, wasn't in the head. It was very much in the body. It was very much just sort of drawing on what you have seen, what you've experienced, what you've heard about. It's about not taking it too seriously. It's about taking it super seriously and not at the same time. Yeah, I think that was the first step into realizing that writing and making art isn't this heavy burden or even craft. It's actually a muscle, and it's actually something that is about just being incredibly honest, because most people want to be impressive. And it's that honesty and that truthfulness of just totally being yourself that is what's engaging.
That's wonderful. We have a technical slot, as we call it, on the podcast, which is where we try and consider a sort of practical issue to do with the writing life. And I thought you would be a great person to ask about running workshops, because you have a lot of experience of that. And I know a lot of writers, particularly when times are tough, are often thinking about how to diversify other things they can offer that complement their work or their practice. Running workshops might well be something that someone would like to do. So what would you advise? How do you go about running workshops, and what are the do's and don'ts? What are the secrets from your perspective to running a good workshop?
I think one of the key things is, again, it's that notion of hospitality. You're in charge, the confidence of just like hold the space. Don't worry too much about how it's going. Don't worry too much about getting feedback like in the moment. I do a lot of workshops with teenagers, and like it's hard because you've got a bunch of teenagers that are like, all of them look bored except for like one or two, but then they come up afterwards and they say they loved it or whatever. So like don't worry too much about that. The most interesting workshops are the ones where you are sharing your own practice and how you do things, I find, rather than doing more general writing exercises. I like to shape the workshop depending on who the group is. I do a lot of writing groups for playwrights who are maybe at the beginning of their journey, and that's slightly different to someone who's never written a play, different to a teenager. I don't think I've figured out how to do workshops for teenagers yet. So if anyone has any secrets, please let me know.
You can share those comments on #RLF Collected if anything comes to mind.
Yes, please. But yeah, I think confidence, it's a space of sharing mostly. Like that's what people really get out of it. I really enjoy working with other texts. So I really enjoy reading plays as well as doing writing exercises, particularly, again, if it's specifically for people who would like to do playwriting. For playwriting in particular, I find that asking questions is really useful. Prompts are useful as well, but I think asking questions, people are really receptive to that, particularly if they've been thinking about something for a long time. Getting a sort of I have a set of questions that I like to ask myself, and I like to share those at workshops, and I find that people really are receptive to them if they're already sort of thinking about a play. A question I always ask myself is, if someone picks up this play 200 years from now, what do I want them to understand about this moment right now and why I'm writing this play? I think in another life, I did study history in Cairo, and I think in another life I would have been a historian, which I think is very much related to it's part of the humanities, isn't it? It's about trying to understand who we are and why we are and who we were and why, all of these big questions. And so I find that as a playwright, that's what drives me, is just making sure that there is a record of this is me now, or this is us now, or this is what we were thinking about.
Fantastic. Now we're going to go to Paul Dodgson with the latest Royal Literary Fund news.
A non-fiction book exploring depictions of policing in the media is among the latest titles by Royal Literary Fund Fellows published this month. Criminologist Dr. Marianne Colbrand's Policing in the Media, Representations of the Police in News, Television Police Drama, Documentaries and Beyond draws on 10 years of research. It asks why the media persist in portraying the police as society's protectors in the light of repeated police brutality towards black citizens and the murders of Sarah Everard in the UK and George Floyd in the US, and what will it take for the media to start telling the truth about policing? Policing in the Media is published by Routledge and is available to pre-order now. An RLF Fellow has been shortlisted for a prestigious Children's Book Award for the third time. Twice Carnegie Medal winner Patrick Ness is in the running for Best Writing with Chronicles of a Lizard Nobody in the 2026 Carnegies, the UK's longest-running children's book awards. The winners will be revealed at a live and streamed ceremony on 23rd of June 2026. For more information, visit carnegies.co.uk. An RLF Fellows adaptation of a Bertolt Brecht play has just opened at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Stephen Sharkey's version of The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, Brecht's 1941 satire on Hitler's rise to power, brings the simmering streets of Chicago to the Swan Theatre for Sean Linnon's RSC directorial debut. Double Olivia Award winner Mark Gatiss plays the title character in this gangster spectacle, and there is new music by Placebo. The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui runs until the end of May. For more information, visit rsc.org.uk. An online session and bookshop event in Canterbury are among the literary engagements featuring RLF Fellows in the coming weeks. Jill Dawson will be in conversation about her new novel Pixie with Dr. Midge Gillies. Organised by Cambridge University, this free online event will take place at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, 28th of April. For more information, visit pace.cam.ac.uk. Then, at 6:30 p.m. on Friday, 8th of May, Dr. Midge Gillies will be discussing her book Atlantic Furies, the astounding story of 6 female aviators who battled to become the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean by plane, at Waterstones Bookshop in Canterbury. For more details, visit waterstones.com. And finally, Hexham and Middlesbrough are next in line to host RLF Collected live events. David Mark and Saima Mir will be in conversation with Harry Mann at Hexham Book Festival at 2 p.m. on Saturday, 25th of April. Titled For Crime and Country, this event will explore how contemporary crime fiction can both shine a light on the struggles facing England's northern towns and celebrate the under-celebrated. You can book tickets at queenshall.co.uk. The following month will see Bridget Dean and Tahima Ali also in conversation with Harry Mann, tackling the thorny topic of beating writer's block. Followed by a Q&A, the event will take place at 3:30 p.m. on Saturday 16th of May at Middlesbrough Library. Tickets are free and available through eventbrite.com. And now, back to the studio.
Well, Sara, that was so interesting. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have you in the studio. We could have talked for another hour easily.
I know.
But it's been so wonderful. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. If you'd like to share any comments or questions, please use the hashtag RLFCollected on our social media channels. The music was composed by Andy Glenn. There was research by Nicola Baldwin and post-production by James Robertson. Our producer was Anne Morgan.